Hello, all you truth-seeking nurses out there. As promised, this is part 2 of the Honest Nurse presentation on implicit bias training. Now I'm going to show you a slide at this point, and I want you to think long and hard about the title that's in this slide. How to think about implicit bias. These authors have determined that it's up to them to tell you how to think. Now, in the last video of The Honest Nurse, we talked about the epidemic of implicit bias that supposedly plagues our healthcare system today. An explosion of perceived bias that affects every nurse's ability to give competent, reliable nursing care. So much so that our implicit biases as nurses need to somehow be trained out of our brains. Well, unfortunately, this is the world we're living in now. Someone tells us we can't say Columbus Day, Indian summer, or even Chinese food without actually meaning some type of hidden bias against Christopher Columbus, American Indians, or the Chinese people. So let's look at this. Whatever we say begins as a thought in our brain. And in this country, the First Amendment of the Constitution guarantees our right to free speech and therefore freedom of thought. Aren't we the ones to determine how we think? Let's all remember, we are United States citizens or American nationals first and foremost. Because of that, we enjoy the protections of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights from the time we are born. I personally believe that any effort to tell me what to think is a violation of my right to free speech. Now, let's just say that you wanted to impose your belief system on another person or a group of people. Just how would you do that? Well, history is full of examples of how this has been done in the past. The first step is to undermine the current convictions, values, practices, or beliefs of a group of people by shaming them or blaming them for being wrong. The second step is you have to destroy their self-confidence and their strength of will by criticizing them and demeaning their character as a person or people. Then, the people who have sufficiently been beaten down and vulnerable are open to new influences. They say, I'm tired. Stop it now. Just tell me what to think. Tell me what to do. What can I do to make it right? Well, there's no better example of the blame and shame game than the June 11th, 2022 American Nurses Association adoption of the ANA Reckoning Statement. This statement is a sincere apology to nurses of color for all the years that these nurses have been harmed by the ANA. The ANA now seeks forgiveness for not meeting their needs. For a governing body such as the ANA to apologize for years of policies that were serving the patient population pretty well and the nursing population pretty well, to now admitting to being a complete failure just because the policies were written by white nurses, it makes me wonder, just what is the ANA made of? In my career as a nurse, I cannot say that I've ever felt the seeds of division so prevalent as I do today. But what is really curious about all this, if you dare to disagree with the basic premise of implicit bias, then you're labeled a racist. Now, as I've said before, on other episodes of The Honest Nurse, I really try to bring in real-life examples of things that have happened to me or that I've witnessed to try to illustrate the principles of what I present. So, let's get into an example of what happened not too very long ago at a facility that I'm associated with. This facility does a whole lot of colonoscopy procedures. The model of care delivery from the anesthesia point of view is that there is an anesthesiologist who interviews each patient, writes down the history, assesses the anesthesia risk, fills out the paperwork, and we, the nurse anesthetist that's assigned in that room, actually perform the anesthetic for the patient. That's always been the model. For years upon years, that's been the model at this facility. So one day, we have a black patient that comes into the center and says that she was told she was going to receive an anesthesiologist's care. Now, we all know that that was not true because it has never been the model in this facility. I'm not sure where that idea came from, but she believed that if she did not receive care from an anesthesiologist and a nurse anesthetist instead, that meant that she was receiving second-rate care and that she did not deserve second-rate care. And her parting comment to us, once it was explained to her that that's not how it's done in this facility, her parting comment was, "You just don't know what it's like to be black." Now, this example just shows you how damaging it can be to put it out there that people of color don't receive appropriate care because all white nurses have implicit bias. Oh, and by the way, white is a color too. So when there is discussion about people of color, that propaganda is meant to separate whites from everyone else. Labels like this are flying around like snowflakes. For whatever reason, any action is assigned a label, whether it be racist, misogynist, homophobe, whatever. So I ask you, how is that helpful to anyone? It's demeaning, insulting, and shameful. Oh, wait a minute. That's exactly what you have to do to impose your belief system on another. Enter the Implicit Bias in Healthcare course that was developed by the Kentucky Nurses Association. This course attempts to do exactly that to the Kentucky nurses population. What's interesting is that even though the authors recognize many types of supposed bias, from height and weight to heart disease, substance abuse, and smoking, the thrust of the entire course is to focus on racism in nursing. So I have to ask, what about author bias? Well, these authors of the material are academic nurses. Now, in many circles, these nurses are referred to as clipboard nurses, and I know you all know what I'm talking about. Each one of them has many letters after their name. They are also, quote, nurses of color. Where exactly does their authority come from? That if we don't do this thing they want us to do, then we can't live our lives as licensed, registered nurses. Well, if we didn't know it before, the last 3 years have taught us that the bedrock of the destructive activism that plagues our country today lives, breathes, and gets its power from the academic systems, from the kindergarten age all the way through college professional training. So you might just begin to wonder, what can you trust coming from a center for higher learning? After all, what better time to push a woke agenda of implicit bias than during a time when everyone, as a world population, was on the ropes, depressed, tired, unemployed, disillusioned, and lonely. Their course is a masterclass in divisive and discriminatory propaganda. It tells the nurse that implicit bias kills, and white privilege is a covert form of racism. It even describes how white nurses contribute to modern-day lynchings in the workplace. One of the tools listed in the course for measuring implicit bias is implicit bias testing. Now, we've already talked about that in the first episode, but we demonstrated then that this is a discredited concept that accuses people of being racist based on their skin color. But woke activists demand it because it spreads the falsehoods they want everyone to believe. Now, in addition, in order to fulfill the requirement to get relicensed in Kentucky, each nurse has to pay $5 for access to the content. Now, currently, there are approximately 125,000 nurses in Kentucky. Let's just say if each one took this course, and this course was linked to the Kentucky Board of Nursing website that first announced the mandate, well, that would be a windfall of $625,000. $625,000. Where does that money go? Well, common sense says it goes to the authors. So I have to ask, is each practicing nurse in Kentucky unwittingly donating $5 to an activist cause just to stay licensed to earn a living as a nurse? That sounds a whole lot like extortion to me. So I wrote letters to my state's ranking congressional committee leaders, and I wrote to the Kentucky Board of Nursing members asking this question. Guess what I heard back? That's right. Well, wait just a minute. Mandates can be imposed on us from some supposed higher authority in order to keep our jobs, but we can't ask questions about their motives for imposing mandates on us in the first place? Well, if this strategy to coerce the nursing population into a certain behavior sounds familiar, that's because it is very familiar. Over the past 3 years, how many of you were coerced by your employer to accept an unproven thing or face termination? Are you picking up what I'm putting down here? I'm sure you are. I have one more slide I'd like you to take a look at. And again, take a long look at this picture and know there is always a bigger agenda in operation than we, the people, are aware of. My final counsel to all nursing boards that are considering imposing this type of mandate on nurses: do not tie this indoctrination to our licensure. And in this country, don't tell us how to think in order to keep our jobs. And as always, at The Honest Nurse, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Thanks so much for watching today. Please like and subscribe. See you next time.